Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. So today we're going to be looking at a concept that's both ancient and incredibly relevant
Mm,
to modern life,
mm.
the universal law of cause and effect. We're going to be going kind of beyond basic physics here,
Yeah.
thinking about actions and consequences, but with this fascinating spiritual twist.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating concept. We're going to be diving into the teachings of the Sacred Atlantean Brotherhood as guided by their leader, Waxira. And just imagine a world where, every choice you make directly shapes your reality. It's almost like this cosmic reward system.
Oh, love that cosmic
Mhm.
reward system. So our source material today lays out some really profound ideas about this law. And I really can't wait to kind of dig into these with you. We're going to see, why Waxir considered knowledge to be the key to freedom.
Yeah.
And most importantly, how we could apply this ancient wisdom to our everyday lives today.
Yeah, and it's amazing how much these ancient teachings still resonate, in our modern world. So at its core, this law states that every single action has a consequence. Positive actions lead to positive outcomes. And negative actions, well, they lead to negative outcomes.
Okay, so that sounds pretty simple. But I think, often we forget about this very basic principle.
Hmm.
Waxira says that the path to freedom begins with knowledge.
Yeah.
So if we're not aware of this law, are we still bound by it?
Oh, absolutely. Ignorance, unfortunately, doesn't exempt us from, the consequences. Think of it like gravity. If you step off a cliff, you're going to fall,
Hmm.
regardless of whether you understand the law of gravity or not. Similarly, harmful actions are always going to lead to some kind of suffering, whether we're aware of this universal law or not.
That's a really powerful analogy. So it's not necessarily about like a vengeful deity who is, punishing us for our mistakes or our missteps. It's simply the natural consequences of our actions kind of playing out as they will.
Exactly. And, that brings up another really important point. I think so many people are suffering not because they're inherently bad, but because they simply lack the knowledge to see how their choices are shaping their reality.
Yeah, that's a really compassionate way to look at things.
Yeah.
And it really does make you wonder, like, how many times have we acted, you know, without fully understanding the potential consequences of our actions?
I would say probably all the time. And that's exactly where knowledge becomes so crucial. It's like we're taking off a blindfold. We're suddenly able to see clearly the path ahead. And we can make choices that are actually aligned with, with this universal flow.
Okay, so it's not just about avoiding those negative
Yeah.
consequences, but it's also about consciously creating positive ones as well.
Yeah.
And that brings us to some of the specific practices that Wakira emphasizes in the text: forgiveness, compassion, and mindfulness. And all of these seem to be key in, aligning ourselves with this universal law.
Yeah, they absolutely are. And I think it's really important for us to understand how these practices actually work within the context of cause and effect. So, for example, let's take forgiveness. When we're holding on to resentment, when we're reliving past hurts, those are actions too. And they create this ripple effect of negativity. Forgiveness, on the other hand, allows us to break free from that cycle. And it creates this space for healing and positive energy to come through.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So instead of, kind of dwelling on the negative and staying stuck in that, forgiveness is almost like planting a seed of peace and allowing us to move forward.
Precisely. And it's not just about, our own internal state. Acts of compassion and kindness towards others. Those are seeds too. And those seeds have the potential to blossom into something really beautiful, creating these positive ripples in the world around us.
Okay, so we're starting to see how our actions, even our thoughts, have this ripple effect. And that brings up another really interesting concept from our source material. The fear of God. I mean, it sounds a little intimidating at first,
Hmm.
but I'm really curious to hear how Waxhira presents this idea.
Yeah, it's definitely a term that can evoke some strong reactions. But within the teachings of the Sacred Atlantean Brotherhood, this idea of fear, it isn't about cowering before like an angry deity or anything like that. It's more about respecting the power. Like, think about electricity. You wouldn't just casually stick your finger in a light socket because you understand the consequences.
Right. So it's more about awareness and a healthy respect for the law itself.
Exactly. It's understanding that this universal law is constantly in operation. Every action, every thought has a consequence. And that awareness should really inspire us to make choices with a deeper understanding of their potential impact.
Yeah, and that ties in perfectly with that quote from Proverbs that we see mentioned in the text.
Wow.
The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.
Absolutely. Again, it's not about blind obedience or terror. It's about approaching life with this sense of reverence and responsibility,
Huh.
recognizing that we're all a part of something much bigger than ourselves.
I'm really starting to see how this concept of fear when it's properly understood, can actually be incredibly empowering. It's about stepping into a place of conscious awareness and making choices that align with the wisdom of this universal law.
It's about becoming active participants in shaping our reality. And, while we're on the topic of making wise choices, Waxhira also offers some guidance on who we choose to surround ourselves with, particularly, cautioning us about the influence of fools.
That's interesting. And I'm assuming that fool doesn't just mean someone who lacks intelligence. So what's the deeper meaning here?
Yeah, you're right. It goes way beyond just simple intelligence. In this context, a fool is someone who lacks the wisdom to really understand and respect the law of cause and effect. They tend to act very impulsively without considering the consequences of their actions. And that can lead to a whole cascade of negative outcomes, not just for them, but for the people around them as well.
So it's not about judging someone's intelligence, but rather observing their actions and how those actions actually align with this universal law.
Exactly. And this is where the idea of personal accountability comes into play. Now, we're not responsible for the actions of others, but we are responsible for the choices that we make, including who we choose to spend our time with.
Yeah, that really brings to mind that saying, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. It makes you think about, the energy that we're exposing ourselves to and how that energy might be influencing our own choices and our own actions.
That's such a great point, because if we're constantly surrounded by people who are making these reckless choices, it becomes so much easier to get caught up in that cycle of, negative consequences. On the other hand, when we surround ourselves with people who understand and respect the law of cause and effect, it creates this environment that really supports our growth, and it helps us make more conscious choices.
Yeah, it's like creating this positive feedback loop. Surrounding ourselves with wisdom and positive energy makes it easier to cultivate those same qualities within ourselves.
Exactly. And all of this ties back to that incredibly powerful statement from Waxira. He says, "You are not a victim of life. You are a participant." This idea really resonated with me when I first encountered it.
It is a really powerful statement. It really shifts our perspective from feeling helpless to recognizing our own agency and shaping our own reality.
It reminds us that we have choices. We're not just leaves blowing in the wind. Every choice we make, no matter how small it may seem, is planting a seed. And that seed will eventually bear fruit.
Brings us right back to that cosmic reward system.
It does. And this is where things start to get really interesting, because it begs the question, what kind of fruit do we want to cultivate in our lives? What are those seeds that we're planting each and every day?
Yeah, it really is like we're the gardeners of our own lives, aren't we?
Yeah.
Carefully tending to the seeds that we've planted. But, that kind of brings up another question for me. We've been focusing a lot on, the power of positive action and creating positive ripples. But what about the times when we're dealing with the consequences of choices we might not be so proud of? What about those seeds that we kind of wish we hadn't planted?
Yeah, that's a really important question. I mean, life isn't always, sunshine and roses. And sometimes we do find ourselves facing the repercussions of, past mistakes. And I think that's where this concept of, this universal law can feel a little daunting at times.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if we're forever bound by the choices that we made in the past.
Yeah.
Even when, maybe we were operating from a place of ignorance.
It's a question for the ages, isn't it? Our text doesn't really go into detail about things like karmic resolution or, how exactly we navigate those heavier consequences. But it does really emphasize the liberating power of awareness. So even when we're facing difficult situations that stem from, past choices, recognizing this principle of cause and effect can really help us approach those challenges with a different mindset.
So instead of feeling like a victim of our circumstances, we can start to see those challenges as opportunities for growth and learning.
Exactly. We can ask ourselves, okay, what can I learn from this particular experience? How can I use this new knowledge to make, different choices moving forward? And it's not about dwelling on the past or, beating ourselves up. It's about using these experiences to cultivate wisdom and move towards, a more positive future.
I love that. It's like we're taking responsibility for the garden. Even when maybe we didn't plant all the seeds ourselves, maybe we inherited some weeds or some thorny bushes from previous, gardeners. But we still have that power to tend to the soil and cultivate something beautiful.
I love that analogy. And I think it also highlights the importance of self-compassion in this whole process. I mean, we're all human. We all make mistakes. It's really what we do with those mistakes that truly matters.
Absolutely. And speaking of making mistakes, one thing that I was kind of curious about is this idea of grace. Is there any room for grace within this seemingly unyielding law of cause and effect?
That's a fascinating question, and I think it opens up, a whole other dimension to our conversation here. And the source material that we're working with doesn't specifically address, the concept of grace,
Mm.
but it does emphasize that transformative power of knowledge and conscious choice.
Hmm. So even though the law itself is impartial, maybe grace kind of comes into play through our own understanding and application of this wisdom.
That's a really interesting idea. Maybe grace is woven into the very fabric of the universe, offering us these opportunities to learn and to grow from our experiences, even when we do face those natural consequences of our actions. It's definitely a concept worth pondering, I think.
Yeah, it really is. This whole conversation is making me think about that delicate balance between personal responsibility and, those forces that are kind of beyond our control.
Yeah, it's a complex dance, isn't it? On the one hand, we have this incredible power to shape our reality through the choices we make, and yet there's always going to be elements of life that we simply can't control. Those unexpected twists and turns that, throw us off course.
And maybe that's where the real mastery lies, in learning to navigate those uncertainties with awareness, with wisdom, and with this deep understanding of, this universal law.
Absolutely. It's about surrendering to the flow of life while simultaneously recognizing our own agency within that flow.
So it's not necessarily about becoming obsessed with, controlling every outcome, but it's about making choices that are aligned with our highest good and trusting that, the universe will kind of unfold as it should.
Precisely. It's about finding that sweet spot between effort and surrender. We plant the seeds, we tend to the garden as best as we can, but ultimately we surrender to those natural rhythms of, growth and decay.
I'm really starting to see how understanding this law can be both empowering and liberating.
It is. It frees us from that illusion that we're victims of circumstance. And it invites us to step into our role as conscious creators.
Yeah, and it gives us this framework for understanding not only our successes, but also our challenges, allowing us to approach both with a sense of wisdom and purpose.
I couldn't have said it better myself. By understanding the interconnectedness of all things, the ebb and flow of cause and effect, we can really move through life with greater awareness, with greater compassion, and ultimately with a deeper sense of peace.
This has been such a fascinating exploration. We've really gone deep into this concept of cause and effect. And I feel like I'm seeing the world through a whole new lens now, one that really highlights the interconnectedness of everything.
Yeah, it really is remarkable how much wisdom is contained in these ancient teachings. And what really strikes me is how practical this knowledge is. It's not just theoretical,
No.
It's something that we can apply to our lives right here, right now.
Absolutely. It's not about, going off to a mountaintop and becoming some kind of spiritual guru. It's about making, small conscious choices in our everyday lives, understanding that those choices have a ripple effect. And that ripple effect extends far beyond, just ourselves.
And that can feel both empowering and daunting, I think, at the same time. It's like
Yeah.
holding a tiny seed in your hand.
Yeah.
And knowing that this seed has the potential to grow into this mighty tree, it makes you really realize the weight of each decision, the potential for both creation and destruction. Right. But I think that awareness is where the real magic happens. It's not about living in fear of making the wrong choice. It's about approaching each decision with mindfulness and with intention.
I think of it as this dance between awareness and action. We become more attuned to the consequences of our actions. And that awareness really guides us toward choices
Yeah.
that are aligned with, our highest good and the good of the world around us.
So it's not just about, personal gain
Yeah.
or avoiding those negative consequences. It's about recognizing that we're all part of this interconnected web of life. And our actions have the power to create these ripples of either harmony or discord.
I love that. Ripples of harmony or discord.
Yeah.
That really captures the essence of this universal law. And it reminds us that even the smallest acts of kindness, the tiniest seeds of compassion, can have a profound impact on the world around us. And it brings us back to that beautiful quote from Waxhira. He says, "The seeds you plant today will bloom tomorrow." And it really leaves us with this question, what kind of garden do we want to create, both within ourselves and in the world around us?
That's the question, isn't it? And I think the beauty of this law is that it really offers us a path, a way to navigate the complexities of life with a deeper understanding of, the consequences of our actions. It's not a guarantee of happiness or success or anything, but it is a really powerful tool for creating a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
So for our listeners out there who are maybe just beginning to explore this concept, what would be like one key takeaway that you would offer?
One key takeaway. I would say start by simply observing. Pay attention to the choices that you're making each and every day, the words that you speak, the actions that you take, and notice the consequences that unfold, both the positive and the negative. And don't judge yourself, just observe. That simple act of awareness, I think, is really the first step toward aligning yourself with this universal law.
That's such great advice. Start with observation. And from that place of awareness, we can begin to make, more conscious choices,
Yeah.
knowing that each choice is planting a seed. That will shape our future.
Exactly. And remember, we're not alone in this journey. We're all interconnected. We're all part of this grand cosmic dance of cause and effect.
Well, on that note, it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive, but I have a feeling this conversation is going to continue to unfold in our own minds, long after we've finished recording.
I agree. This is the kind of knowledge that stays with you. It gently nudges you toward greater awareness and intention in all areas of your life.
To our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this journey of exploration.
Mhm.
We hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to, delve deeper into the mysteries of this universal law of cause and effect.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.